Okay, so picture this. You sit down to eat a meal, a normal meal, nothing crazy, and almost immediately your body feels off. It feels tight. Not just that uncomfortable, full feeling, but like tight and pressurized, like something inside is just not moving the way it should. And you've been dealing with this for a while now, and you've tried a lot of things to help it. Maybe you've done the elimination diets, some kind of probiotic or prebiotic, or maybe a gut protocol or two. And some of it helps for a hot minute, but it never actually sticks. And nothing really seems to reach the root. If that sounds familiar, this episode is for you because today I'm going to be talking about a pattern I see all the time in my client work, and almost no one is really explaining it thoroughly. And it's called methane dominance. And by the end of this episode, I think a lot of things are going to start clicking into place for you. All right. Well, hello and welcome back to the Rewilded Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Lydia Joy. And I don't know about you guys, but May might genuinely be one of my favorite months of the entire year. We're finally settling into the growth season. The temperatures are actually palatable. So much amazing fresh food, produce is coming back into my life. And honestly, it's bringing me back to life along with it. I've been out in my garden so much, as much as I possibly can. I've been harvesting a ton of spinach and herbs, and I just got the first major wave of my lettuce coming in. Been collecting radishes here and there, eating a few every day, getting enough to ferment a bunch. Radishes are one of my favorite. I don't know why people think radishes suck. A lot of people say nobody likes radishes. I disagree. I think everyone should give them another try. They're so cleansing and crisp and wonderful this time of year. It's like a little purification in your system, right? My herbs are starting to really proliferate. I just started collecting some of my chamomile finally. Anyways, this is just bringing me so much joy. It does so much good for my nervous system. Super grounding. I'm going to be talking about this a lot in the podcast. So keep staying tuned for that. But before we get into the heart of today's episode, I do want to mention this podcast is listener supported only. I have no sponsors, no ads, just me talking to you guys about things that I genuinely care about. And there are a few simple ways you can support the show if it's been helpful to you. First, share it. If you've got a friend, a family member, a coworker who's been dealing with gut stuff, mysterious body symptoms, anything like that, send them this episode. That's honestly the biggest thing you can do. Second, if you could leave me a review on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening right now. If you're on YouTube or Spotify, you can drop comments onto each episode and I will read every single one. And third, this is new and I love it. You can actually text me now. The link is in the first, it's the first link in the show notes. So as soon as this episode is done, you can literally text me and tell me what your takeaway was. Like, hey, Lydia, I just finished your episode and here's what landed for me. I genuinely love hearing from you guys. It makes such a difference to know that what I'm sharing is actually reaching people, and I appreciate you more than you know. All right, so let's get into it. So today's episode is based on a blog post I published a few weeks back. The title is When Your Body Feels Tight, Dry, and Unpredictable, the Methane Pattern Nobody is Explaining. And when I posted it in my Instagram stories when it first came out, someone left a comment in my stories. They sent me a DM, and it honestly was so meaningful for me to hear their perspective and how the post really landed for them. So I want to read it to you before I dive in because I think it could resonate with some folks. This person said, it was such a great and helpful post. Thank you. Gosh, it was really the whole post. I've dealt with a lot of the issues you described and discussed, and it was like you put all the puzzle pieces together for me. The info about methane, the dry and tight body and fascia, the doctors I've seen or PT, just look at what is in their lane and not at the big picture. They probably don't know much of what you shared. I think it just made sense to me and what I've experienced in my body the last 6 months. So I'm so grateful. And that is exactly why I do this, because there are so many people walking around with this constellation of symptoms going from all kinds of practitioners, right? And of course, everyone is looking at their own little piece of the puzzle and not necessarily zooming all the way out or connecting all the dots. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today. So let's start with the symptom picture, because I think it's worth being really precise here. Because if you've experienced this pattern, you know that the word bloating doesn't quite cover it. It's more than that. It's that feeling of incomplete evacuation, like you never fully finish. Stools can be hard or dry or just inadequate, right? And there's like this low grade pressure in your abdomen that never fully resolves. And then a weird one that people don't connect to their gut at all can even be head pressure, or maybe something going on in the head or the throat or the sinuses. Like maybe you're constantly clearing your throat, or you have some kind of sinus congestion and pressure that seems to cycle with your digestive symptoms. When they get worse, those things get worse too. And then there's, of course, the whole body stuff, right? Like you maybe experience tight hip flexors, tension in the groin, the sacrum, your shoulders maybe are more guarded. And definitely the diaphragm. The diaphragm is holding tight. It won't drop all the way. Um, Maybe you've lost connection with how to even take a deep breath anymore, right? Like you're breathing, you're like, wait, how do I breathe? Um, and even it can go all the way down to your feet. Your feet might feel a little more tight, tense, right? So it's really this overall sense that your whole body is bracing. And, there's a piece of it there because likely there's stress in your life, right? But really, there's a whole structural piece, like the tissue in your body itself is just contracted and holding and can't like let go, right? And then a lot of people experience different patterns of potentially dryness throughout. Maybe the skin is drier, or eyes even, sinuses, right? Even if you're drinking enough, right? You'll still feel this dry sensation in places throughout your body. Then there's also some version of reactivity where, you're eating your meals, and sometimes one day a certain food is fine and the next day it hits completely differently, right? There's this variance from day to day of like, is this food going to feel good in my body or not, right? And so your system feels kind of like a hair trigger in ways that you can't really make total logical sense connecting all these dots, right? So if that's you, or, that's some of it, it's possible you're looking at a more methane dominant gut pattern. And here's the thing, the reason it shows up in all of these it's seemingly unrelated systems, because we dissect the body and we, parse it off into parts to different types of practitioners, right? But everything affects everything. Let's not forget. Um, it's never, ever, ever random, right? It's very mechanistic, right? And it makes complete biological sense when you understand what methane actually does in the body. So first things first, methane in the gut is not made by bacteria. Most people don't know that. It's made by archaea, specifically methanogenic archaea, primarily a species called Methanobrevibacter, I don't ever say these words right, Methanobrevibacter smithii. Sorry about that. Okay, so archaea are an entirely different domain of life from bacteria. They're ancient, they're slower growing, they're very resilient, and they don't respond to most conventional antimicrobial approaches the way that bacteria do. And that's a big part of why this pattern is so hard to shift with standard gut protocols. So, what methanogens do is consume hydrogen gas, which bacteria produce during fermentation, and convert it into methane. And in a balanced gut, um, this actually serves a purpose. But when the methanogens become dominant, they change everything. Okay, and here's a key thing to understand. Methane doesn't cause damage in the classic inflammatory sense. It doesn't like set off alarm bells the way that some other gut imbalances do. What it does is alter the tempo of the whole system. And tempo, it turns out, governs almost everything downstream. We could call it also motility, right? Because methane slows down the intestinal transit. It increases smooth muscle contraction tone. It increases water reabsorption from the colon. It reduces fluid turnover. It creates longer fermentation windows in the gut, which means more microbial metabolite production, more endotoxin exposure, and more low-grade immune activation. So it changes the speed of the gut ecosystem, the motility. And when that speed changes, right, we know everything that depends on movement, flow, and turnover starts to slow down and suffer, right? So that's where you get tight or stagnant or rigid or dry. And that's not just how people describe feeling. That's the actual physiological fingerprint of a methane dominant system. It's not a metaphor. It's very much biological, right? So, to understand why this pattern develops and why it's so persistent, you need to understand how hydrogen moves through the gut. So, when microbes ferment carbohydrates, right, because our microbes eat carbohydrates, like that's their fuel source, right? But we have different versions. There's all kinds of uh carbohydrates, like plants. There's such a variance, right? And then there specifically are more fermentable fibers, right? Resistant starches. And those are the ones that can produce hydrogen gas as a byproduct. And that's normal, but that hydrogen needs to go somewhere. And there are three main pathways that use it up. So we've got the methanogens converting hydrogen into methane, sulfate reducing bacteria convert it into hydrogen sulfide, and acetogens convert it into acetate, which actually supports beneficial metabolic pathways. So in a balanced ecosystem, hydrogen gets distributed across multiple pathways. In an imbalanced system, one pathway can take over. So when methanogens dominate, they consume a large portion of available hydrogen and produce methane. Methane slows down your transit. It's, that slower transit time means there's more time for things to stick around and ferment longer, right? And the longer things stick around and ferment, the more it's possible to produce hydrogen. And the more the hydrogen feeds, the more the methane production. Do you get it? So it's like a vicious cycle. It goes on and on. It's a loop. And this is why the pattern doesn't resolve with short-term intervention, because the loop has to be interrupted at multiple points simultaneously. And I want to be really clear about something here. The goal is not to stop hydrogen production. You can't and you shouldn't. Hydrogen is a necessary part of a functioning gut. What you're doing is shifting how hydrogen is utilized, right? We want to rebuild enough microbial diversity that multiple pathways, including acetogens and butyrate supporting organisms, can function effectively. And that takes time, and it takes sequencing, and it takes a terrain and a nervous system that can actually support the shift, right? So when I say tight gut, tight body, it's not a metaphor, right? It's like the piece that a lot of people are missing, especially body workers. They don't, they're not trained to understand what's going on in the gut, right? So it matters most for understanding why your body feels the way it does, because methane doesn't just slow the gut, it directly increases smooth muscle contraction tone. And that tone doesn't stay contained to the intestines. It spreads through the fascial network of the entire torso. So think about where the diaphragm and the pelvic floor sit in relation to your intestines, both above and below. They're responding constantly to pressure changes, to movement, and even neurological signaling from the enteric nervous system. So, when your transit slows and gas accumulates and pressure builds, the diaphragm can't drop. And then the pelvic floor can't release. And then they both start compensating. And that compensation begins to radiate throughout the longer it's being held, right? The hip flexors tighten because the pelvic floor is guarding, right? The low back tightens because the diaphragm's restricted. And then the thoracic spine rounds because the whole anterior chain is under tension. Even the arches of your feet contract because that fascial line that runs from your gut through your hip flexors and all the way down through your legs is pulling, right? So a lot of people in this pattern describe feeling like their body is like on guard. It's like holding all the time. Not it's not like they're genuinely like constantly anxious per se. It's just this physical, structural, like the tissue is just braced. Right? And so when, something actually shifts, right? Like when something actually moves, like maybe say you reduce the gas or your transit time improves, a lot of that pressure drops and suddenly like the hips can soften or like you can actually like release your jaw. Like maybe have you ever paid attention to how much you're clenching your jaw and you don't even realize it? Maybe start checking in with that or your shoulders. Like I remember when I was deep in this pattern, I just would tell people, I just want to drop my shoulders. Like, I just want to, like, my shoulders to just fall. Like, they won't drop. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're just constantly gripped in certain places in your body. But when these things and when the pressure moves and releases in the transit, all this stuff can start to, like, release and soften. And the body work should start to hold better, right? And this directly correlates with the improvement in the gut function. And it's not coincidence because it's just that direct relationship between the gut pressure and the fascial tone starting to become more obvious, right? And we know that fascia is that collagen matrix. It's suspended in hydrated gel. It's interwoven with immune cells and sensory nerve endings, and it's electrically conductive, and it is dependent on fluid movement and our microvascular health to stay elastic and supple. So when our gut environment shifts, when our immune tone has to rise up, or when endotoxin exposure increases. I did a whole series on the gut, by the way, and there's one specifically on endotoxins if you want to go back and check that out. Right. So when those endotoxins kind of like become increased, it could happen from so many things. Like you forgot that you took antibiotics a year ago for 2 or 3 things that came up. A year later, you're feeling this way. You went through a major life stress. You have an injury and it stressed you out. And then 2 months later, all of a sudden your gut's acting up. You got sick in the winter and it was really bad and it took you a month to recover. And then your gut just started acting up, right? All these things. So when the fluid dynamics in your whole body slow way down, right, the fascia is going to respond and it's going to guard and protect. And so it'll stiffen because it's becoming defensive. And so when you have tight, dry fascia, it's defensive fascia. And when you understand what's driving the dryness internally, the tissue picture starts to make much more sense. Okay, so here's why you can drink water and still feel tight and dry. This one confuses people a lot because I have heard this about a million times. They're like, oh, I drink water. So they think by any conventional measure that they're not technically dehydrated. Yet everything in their body is showing them that they are. They're dry, their skin, they're having maybe they're more allergically reactive. Their sinuses are bothering them, their throat, their mucosa. There's a lot of ways that this could show up. You don't necessarily have to have all of them. And I have to kind of bring this back up. I feel like I've say this a million ways till Sunday, but hydration, we know, is not just fluid intake, right? It's fluid distribution. And in a methane dominant system, it's going to be distributing that fluid very poorly because it's going to slow down your secretions. It slows down the circulation of your bile. It slows the entire fluid dynamic of the digestive tract. And bile matters here a lot. It's not just for fat digestion. It's a major driver of fluid movement through the intestinal system. And when bile is sluggish, the whole system dries out downstream. Then you layer in things that I see all the time with people like low tissue potassium, because that is the primary intracellular mineral. It supports our smooth muscle contraction, gut peristalsis, and cellular hydration. And when potassium is low in the tissue, aldosterone rises, sodium dominates, and fluid distributes toward the extracellular space rather than nourishing the tissue that actually needs it. So you can literally drink water that never really reaches where it needs to go. Now, we can layer in the gut barrier permeability. Same thing as saying leaky gut for intestinal permeability, whatever you want to call it. So when the gut lining has been under that strain, right, the endotoxins that are present can enter circulation in low but chronic amounts. And so the immune system has to respond to that, right? And in many cases, cytokines can increase, histamine will rise, and that inflammatory activity changes how water is distributed throughout the body. And so the result becomes the connective tissue shifts into this protective stiffening, right? The extracellular matrix, the hydrated gel that healthy fascia depends on, becomes less hydrated, less elastic, and less responsive. And then the gut mucosa itself dries out too, and that mucus layer thins. And then a worsening loop establishes itself quietly, chronically in the background. So, this is also why a lot of people notice that they soften in the summer. More sun, more movement, maybe more sweating, naturally higher potassium from all the fresh seasonal food produce. So their internal tissue environment shifts and their fascia can respond better. So just keep that in mind if you notice this in your life. And so it's cool because we have this picture of like what your body can actually be capable of when the conditions change. So then there's kind of this thing where people are having, people be like, oh man, I've been eating this thing and now all of a sudden it doesn't hit right. Or you try it one day and a week later it's not working. So it's like the same thing can hit differently a lot, right? There's this inconsistency. And that's can be very disorienting. But why it happens is because a slow methane dominant gut means longer contact time between the gut contents and the immune tissue lining your intestines. So that longer contact time means more possible immune activation. And more endotoxin exposure, more histamine potential. And histamine is a huge piece of the reactivity puzzle, right? When the barrier integrity is compromised, when mast cells are primed, when certain bacteria are overrepresented, histamine goes up. And methane feeds this by slowing motility, which increases that bacterial contact time, which increases immune activation. And histamine actually can constrict smooth muscle and activate those sensory nerves, drive things like throat clearing, sinus congestion, and it makes the tissue tight. It makes it reactive, over alert, more sensitized to things that wouldn't even register in a calmer internal environment. So now you've got methane slowing the system, histamine making it reactive, a thin mucus barrier that can't adequately buffer what crosses through, and potassium depleted smooth muscle that can't contract cleanly or release fully. So the same food can hit differently depending on the day because of all of these variables shifting day to day. Your sleep the night before changes your immune tone, right? Your stress level changes your motility. Your mineral status from the previous few days can actually change how well your barrier holds up. So you're never reacting to just any one thing. It's more of a total state of your system that's operating at the very edge of its capacity. And that total state tends to fluctuate. Now, there's a nutrient piece I want to talk about. It's a downstream consequence of methane dominance that almost, I don't know, I don't hear it being discussed a whole lot, but the methogenic archaea use up B12 as a direct cofactor for their own metabolism. So when methanogens are significantly overgrown, they're competing for B12 at the intestinal level before it ever gets to you. This isn't a dietary problem or a supplementation problem. It's really just a competition problem, right? So again, that same gut environment, slow transit, low bile flow, altered pH, reduced microbial diversity, right? It also creates conditions where iron absorption becomes inefficient, regardless of what you eat or supplement. So a lot of people in this pattern also have fatigue, maybe some version of brain fog, poor recovery from things, right? And it doesn't necessarily respond to directly supplementing with B12 or iron the way people think it should. And that's because the issue isn't necessarily intake, although, you might need to check and see if you are getting enough, but the issue is really what's happening in the gut environment that's preventing proper absorption and utilization. So getting the methane pattern under control, restoring transit, rebuilding the bile flow, right, improving your terrain all around is actually what changes what your body can absorb and use. And that's when supplementation and dietary changes actually start to produce results that stick around and stay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 patterns inside this one pattern, right? Because clinically, methane dominance doesn't always look exactly the same. There are roughly 3 overlapping presentations, and knowing which one is primary changes how you approach the work, right? So the first I'd call like a fermentation dominant methane. There's lots of gas and bloating. It gets worse after carbohydrates and any more fermentable foods. Stools that fluctuate. It's like maybe you're not severely constipated, but you can experience significant abdominal pressure after eating. The main driver here is the excess hydrogen from that fermentation in the gut feeding the methanogens. Then we have the slow transit methane, which is more persistent constipation, stools that are hard or incomplete, sluggish motility as more of the primary complaint rather than like the gas volume. And here, methane is directly altering the motor pattern of the intestines and slowing peristalsis itself. Then the third is more of a tension dominant methane. And this is the one that gets missed the most because the primary complaints are people who have all this body tension, pelvic floor tightness, diaphragm restriction, hip locking, fascial tightness. I think I can say these things because I think more people are becoming aware of all this stuff. There's a lot of talk about all of it lately. If you're tuning in to the wellness world, and you guys know what I mean. Um, and then gas that feels like more trapped rather than like excessive flatulence. Like it feels like you have gas pockets and it's like, it's there and it takes time for it to like move through. Does that make sense? And so, the symptoms tend to fluctuate a lot based on the state of your nervous system because, that gut body connection is more of the loudest signal you're experiencing. Now, most people have elements of all three, but maybe one tends to dominate for them. And so understanding kind of which one matters because kind of the entry point for how we work will vary from person to person, right? Because if you have a fermentation dominant situation, that needs careful attention to, the fermentation load and microbial balance, like what you're eating could really matter. Slow transit cases really need help with stronger motility intervention. And then the tension dominant cases, they need kind of a mixture, right? They need more nervous system and structural support just as much as the gut intervention. Honestly, I think we need all of it all the time these days, you guys. But, it can help you kind of prioritize is what I'm getting at. Because in the tension dominant cases, the gas is, getting that gas is moving is what releases the fascial restriction. And that requires both internal work, right? Like the gut work, the ecosystem work that I talk about. And a lot of times we need a little external support through movement, breath, body work, all that. So a lot of people have tried and nothing has actually really totally held for them in this pattern. And so we have to talk a little bit more. Okay, bear with me. This is because I feel like when you understand some of this better, it helps you connect dots and not fragment your care all over the place and feel super overwhelmed. Right? So again, methanogens are not bacteria. They don't respond to most herbal antimicrobials or conventional gut protocols, right? They're slow growing, they're deeply embedded in the ecosystem and they're supported by the very conditions they help create. Ooh, that slow transit, that low diversity in the gut, good bacteria that we need for all these key functions, right? And that then makes the competition for hydrogen be reduced so they have more free reign. Do you see what I'm saying? So if we just go in with these killing focused approaches, it's not going to work well. Because when you try to directly assault the methanogens without first like building the ecosystem that would fill the space they vacate, you often just create a vacuum that refills and the terrain that allowed them to dominate is still there. Right? So adding anything aggressively to a system in this state tends to overwhelm rather than support. So more fermentable fiber can increase hydrogen production and feed more methane. Probiotics introduced to a thin inflamed barrier often don't colonize. They need a stable mucosal surface to adhere to. So a lot of people are like, oh, I take these probiotics. They didn't do anything. Well, they're probably doing something, but you're missing the infrastructure piece, right? So systems like this that I've described throughout this entire episode are slowed way down. They're protective, right? And they don't respond well to any kind of intensity. So they require a different approach entirely and one that restores flow incrementally, rebuilds your inner terrain slowly and steadily before adding all this complexity like a protocol to fix the thing, to fix the markers, right? Because if we don't do that, we're not giving the body, your ecosystem, your terrain, time to actually reorganize itself properly, right? The bottom line is that methane fades when you have appropriate flow going through your whole system. It's not just eradication, the actual flow. It doesn't resolve because you try to kill it. It resolves when your system can move freely again. So, what actually has to change and in what order, right? Sequencing matters as much as the interventions themselves. So, let me walk through the order because I've talked about this all before, but I want to try to make some physiological sense. Motility first, right? Everything depends on this. I usually start with bitters. Now, not all bitters are created equal. And so if you know what's going on in your gut, you can use a little bit more targeted bitters. Um, by all means, go out, eat the bitter foods. But if you have a methane dominant gut, the bitters that matter the most are things like dandelion root, artichoke leaf, gentian. And I find that those are some of the most underutilized tools here. They stimulate bile production and release, they support liver function, they activate digestive secretions and get things moving. Ginger. Ginger, ginger, ginger. I hope you like ginger in this pattern because ginger, man, I tell you what, it could really, really help because it supports motility through different mechanisms. So it really, really, really helps. Things like magnesium to start to support the smooth muscle function, right? Consistent meal timing to allow the migrating motor complex, which is your gut's housekeeping wave that kind of like runs between meals, to function properly, right? And also, another thing that is so underestimated is like movement. Some type of light movement after eating helps the gas move through rather than just like sit and build pressure. So whatever that is for you, walking, just get up and go for a walk, you know? And then we got to talk about the barrier before we get into any like I don't like the word aggressive, but I feel like a lot of the microbial protocols out there in the past from the past like decade plus have been a little more on the aggressive side. Um, because probiotic colonization depends on mucin quality, available oligosaccharides, stable short chain fatty acid production, and like a non hostile immune environment, an immune environment that can stand down. That's like, I don't have to react here, right? So if the mucosal surface is inflamed or thin, the bacteria you introduce won't adhere. So we need to get into like barrier support and repair that makes sense for the individual. This can be slightly tricky. There are the commonly recommended things, but we have to find what a person tolerates, right? We've got the marshmallow root, everybody knows about zinc carnosine, slippery elm, but not everybody tolerates it and or uses it properly in conjunction with other things. Even butyrate support's being more recommended these days, right? But there's still, we kind of have to make it all make sense so that what you're doing is covering a lot of bases at once, right? Getting adequate potassium, vitamin A, right? That can increase the stickiness, if you will, of the surface, right? And stabilize your immune environment. And this is what makes the subsequent microbial work actually hold. So, then, of course, bile support is really huge. I love dandelion root. If you can tolerate it, it's one of my favorites. And honestly, I've started collecting and drying my own. It's amazing. The dandelion is amazing. But it actually addresses bile stimulation. It selectively feeds bifidobacteria through its inulin content, and then supports liver function simultaneously. Most people have not detected bifido on their biome effects. That adds to the challenge. I really like artichoke leaf tincture. It's oftentimes in a lot of the bitters. Some people might need a little bit more. than what a bitter formulation will contain. And it's a really potent prokinetic and biostimulant. Um, so that's another one that I'm just sharing a couple of the common things. And bile acids are actually antimicrobial, so they regulate the microbial composition and shape the ecosystem. So, really improving bile flow changes the entire terrain that the methanogens have been thriving in. Of course, mineral foundation is underneath all of it, right? There's so much to talk about here. I'll just say a few things. Potassium, I mentioned it already. It supports that smooth muscle, the peristalsis. Without adequate tissue potassium, the gut can't contract, it can't release properly, which then feeds the methane loop. And then, of course, we've got sodium, magnesium. Like making sure you're getting all these three really balanced. They matter for adrenal function, cellular hydration, so much. Of course, then zinc. We got to think about zinc because it's one of the key players in all of our digestive production, including HCl, synthesis. Right. So the whole mineral layer is not separate from the gut layer. They're part of the same pattern and team, if you will. Nervous system, structural support, right? So people have tension dominant presentations, especially that body work. Uh, even just learning to pay attention to your breath, not necessarily doing some crazy breathing technique or anything like that, but just kind of tuning in, because if you're in that pattern and you're holding pattern, you know, you may be holding your breath more than you realize and clenching more than you realize. So just getting somewhere where someone can help you become more aware of that so you can then become more aware of it throughout your day is super helpful as well. Movement after meals, vagal tone support is often really, really helpful as well. These are not like soft little add ons. These are things that become necessary in a body that has gotten here, right? They're mechanistically very important and they help the gas move. And then that helps reduce the guarding of the fascia, if you will. And then, therefore, the nervous system can shift out of that protective state that's been reinforcing the tight, slow, reactive gut function. So, when the gas moves, the fascia softens. And when the fascia softens, the breathing improves. When your breathing improves, so does your vagal tone. It's all connected. So, and finally, slow, deliberate diversification of the microbial ecosystem. I mentioned the acetogens. They're the beneficial hydrogen consumers that compete with the methanogens. They will start to thrive when there's moderate fermentable fiber. You have already got stable transit time. You're starting to have a stable barrier. So then you can start to bring in more of these fiber-rich foods and actually tolerate them. And they start to feed the things that you need them to feed. Usually we start with things like resistant starch from cooked and cooled things like rice or potatoes or oats. Different things like things that contain pectin. I usually start with cooked carrots or apples or something like that. Maybe we can bring in some flaxseed, right? These feed the acetogenic pathways and butyrate producers gradually, building more competition for hydrogen without triggering explosive gut fermentation that is very overwhelming to that sensitivity the system now has, right? So I hope this gives you, I know it's a lot to take in, but I hope it gives you kind of an understanding of what the ecosystem work can look like, right? And the longer, more slow terrain level approach, right? The kind of work that we have to do, it doesn't produce dramatic results in a week or two or a month, but it does produce results that compound over months and actually start to hold. So, what I really want you to walk away with today is this, right? If your body feels tight, dry, reactive, unpredictable, and nothing you've tried actually is really moving the needle to resolve it, there's a reason for that, because it's not that, a lot of times people haven't tried hard enough that, a lot of times people have tried all kinds of things, right? It's just that they haven't necessarily taken the completely different approach that restores the kind of right hierarchy of flow before it tries to fix anything else, right? And like I said, the methane fades when you have more flow. That's the most simple way I can say it. And flow basically comes from restoring the motility, rebuilding your terrain, supporting bile, addressing minerals, and giving your body's ecosystem the time and conditions it needs to actually reorganize. All right. So a lot of people's system just got stuck in that loop and it needs to be interrupted at all the right points in the right order. So if what you heard today maps in any way to your personal experience, the tightness, the dryness, the reactivity, the pressure in your gut, the sense that you can't find the thread that connects it all, this is worth looking at properly. And inside my practice in my minerals and microbes program, this is exactly the kind of pattern that I work with, right? We look at the whole piece, the mineral status, the gut ecology, nervous system tone, your whole health history, your current capacity, as one single integrated picture, not separate silos, right? Because we want to figure out what your system actually needs in the order it can actually receive it. Okay. So it's the kind of work we're trying to address what's driving the pattern. And for many people, they've been managing this for years. That distinction matters more than anything else. So you can learn more in the show notes about that. If that sounds like you, check it out, read it over thoroughly, make sure you find yourself in it. Reach out if you have any questions. I certainly would love to hear from you. And if you like this episode, please leave me a comment, send me a text. I appreciate you guys being here. Please take really good care of yourselves in these times. Stay wild, stay well, get out into the land, the garden, eat something fresh. I'll talk to you guys really, really soon.